some, cinema is considered the most important art form in the world today. What started out as a series of scientific experiments by early 19th century innovators in the pursuit of photorealistic still imagery soon evolved into what many at the time thought would be a novelty or passing fad. Since then, cinema as a creative medium has grown by leaps and bounds to become arguably the world's most popular form of entertainment outside of music and dance. The Ugandan film industry has taken a considerably longer time to find its footing. While Ugandan cinema halls are flooded with Hollywood and Bollywood titles, local films still struggle to find a substantial local devoted audience. You might be asking yourself, why did filmmaking as a cultural practice take so long to take off in Uganda? Or why did the now burgeoning Uganda film industry experience static growth in comparison to other African film industries? These are the kinds of questions this essay seeks to give some much-needed context to.
Like that first time in Africa.
Cinema is the youngest of the major art forms being practiced in the world today. If it were not for the invention of the mechanical camera during the first industrial revolution, this creative practice would not exist because of how early analog still photography and filmmaking was intrinsically and inflexibly tied to its tools of production. Cinema can be defined as the art of motion picture photography, and that came into being decades later with further technological advancements in the field of photography in the late 1800s, thanks to the work of innovators like Edward Muybridge. The 19th century English photographer is most famous for an animated composition of still photos known as The Galloping Horse, made in 1887, a pioneering work of chronophotography. Cinema as we know it today was not fully realized as an art form until the end of the 19th century with the development of the cinematograph motion picture system by Auguste and Louis Lumière, known collectively as the Lumière brothers. Britain's colonial office approached the topic of film in the colonies from two main viewpoints. One, how cinema affected the economic and political interests of the imperial power. Two, how the imperial power might use the cinema to promote what it determined to be the economic, social, and moral welfare of colonial peoples. In the first viewpoint, the disagreeable depictions of the white people in popular films of the time was seen as a threat to the assumed moral superiority and racial supremacy of the colonizers. Sir Hesketh Bell, who served as a colonial governor in Uganda between 1905 and 1908, was one of the colonial policymakers most vehemently opposed to native Africans being exposed to cinema. A famous quote of his is, "The success of our subject races depends entirely on the respect we can inspire. The damage has already been done in India and the Far East, but there is still time to avert similar damage in our tropical African empire." He deplored showing what he considered demoralizing films, showing criminal and immodest actions by white men and women to Africans. This train of thought led to a repressive colonial film policy in most African colonies of the British. A prime example being the censoring of the films of Charlie Chaplin, who was arguably the biggest star in cinema at the time. Most of the films exhibited were usually from the popular American Western genre and colonial propaganda films. What the colonial administration chose to do was to instead harness the power of the cinema to educate and inform native Ugandans on issues to do with health, hygiene, and agricultural best practice. This was conducted by instating what they called the Bantu Education Kinema Experiment. The experiment was carried out in East and South Central Africa between March 1935 and May 1937.
And they used the character called the Kapere. That's why in Uganda, especially in the central, the shirts, the checked shirts are called the Kapere. Because that man who used to, they used that the main character. They called him Kapere. Kapere could build a house without ventilators. And problems always happen to him. Then they show him how to build a right house. He could start a home without a toilet. And then they teach the masses how to build it. Before you, in Uganda, or Uganda especially, before you start building a main house, toilet first. Because even the builders needed the way to go So you start with the toilet. All those that was shown on films. Even how to take drugs. They used to write it 2 times 2. When you write 2 times 2, someone sees 2 times 2, then he gets 2 here and 2 there. He takes them together. But they showed how to. Yeah, that was the beginning of film in Uganda. Colonial masters used it as a way of disseminating that information to the community.
The research work of missionary and scholar John Mal Davis in the Zambian Copper Belt in 1932, funded by the Carnegie Corporation, is often cited as a key motivator for the British Empire to consider the filmmaking initiative in their sub-Saharan colonies. The findings of his excursion into the heartland of Africa were published in the 1933 book, Modern Industry and the African. In the book, he asserts that the mines of the Copper Belt had profoundly altered the pre-industrial societies in which they existed. Davis recommended the use of cinema to help educate the illiterate in their adjustment to a capitalist society with its Western social and economic standards. Local production of films in Uganda in the colonial period following the demise of the Bantu education kingdom experiment remained non-existent for over a decade. However, Uganda was used as a location of a star-led Hollywood production. The African Queen is a 1951 film starring Hollywood icons Humphrey Bogart and Katharine Hepburn. The film follows a British missionary played by Katharine Hepburn trying to flee German East Africa, where battles between British and German colonial troops have started at the onset of World War I. To escape, she enlists the help of a Graf steamboat operator played by Bogart. They attempt to sail down a river and navigate their way out of the battle zone in the face of attacks from German troops and life-threatening environmental challenges. The film was partly shot in Uganda and Congo, with the film crew setting camp in Butiaba in Masindi district. The crew and cast lived in Masindi Hotel, the first hotel in Uganda. Butiaba was used for its strategic placement. The Butiaba port town allowed access by boat to either side of Lake Albert to shoot on location in Congo and in Uganda. The boat rapid scenes were shot around Murchison Falls. The shooting of the film was documented by Katharine Hepburn in her 1987 memoir, The Making of the African Queen, or How I Went to Africa with Bogart, Bacall, and Houston and Almost Lost My Mind. While The African Queen was a prestigious Hollywood adventure with a directing and acting star power to match, and can claim the title of being the first narrative feature-length film shot in Uganda, it does not belong to the canon of Ugandan cinema. Ugandan cinema starts to take root a few years later with the making of the 1953 film Man of Africa. Although the film was directed by British film director Cyril Franco and produced by British Lion Pictures, the entirety of the cast and the vast majority of the crew were Ugandans. The film, set in the lush hilly terrain of pre-independence Kigezi, tells the story of conflict between the Bachiga and the Twa people trying to live side by side. In the film, the central character Jonathan goes in search for virgin land with his tribesmen to start new farms on. The land they find borders a Twa community. The Bachiga in the film have a clear distaste for the Twa people, looking down on them as primitive and backward. But not Jonathan. He strikes up a friendship with the community and tries to bridge the gap between the tribes. The main Ugandan characters are properly fleshed out, with complex relationships, goals, and varying temperaments. They fight, they help each other, they celebrate. Most importantly, they all have a unique understanding of themselves and who they are. This was not the case in most films shot by ethnographers and propagandists on the continent, which at times featured Africans stripped of any pathos or even possessing a complex outlook on the world around them. This was largely due to the colonial gaze and the white supremacist sentiments that looked down on the African way of life. The camera movement and compositions also provided for a level of cinematic flair that was absent in the production of colonial film projects up until that point. The acting in the film is also stellar considering the cast was made up of amateur actors. Chiga historian Paul Ngorogosa features in the film and served in a credited advisory role in the making of the film. The film premiered in the 1954 Cannes Film Festival in competition for the Grand Prix. The film has remained relatively unknown ever since, even in Uganda. It is currently preserved in the British Film Institute archive. At the dawn of independence, theatre and literature were going through a renaissance in Uganda, with a number of exciting new creatives and thought leaders in the field rising to prominence at the time of the nation's birth. In June 1962, Makerere University hosted the first African Writers' Conference. The literary event gathered some of the finest writers of African literature in the English language in sub-Saharan Africa. Officially called the Conference of African Writers of English Expression, it drew parallels to the largely francophone Congress of Black Writers and Artists that had been held in France in 1956 and 1959. Both conferences were organized to address the impact of colonialism on African literature and to chart a collective path forward for African writers in regard to African representation in the art form. The Writers' Conference at Makerere was the first of its kind on the African continent. The Ugandan contingent present at the conference included author Okot Bibitek, playwright Robert Serumaga, linguist and literary theorist Pio Zirimu, dramatist Elvania Namukwaya, and the Ugandan Indian founder of Transition magazine, Rajad Niyogi. Some of their contemporaries from across the African continent who also attended included the likes of Wole Soyinka, Chinua Achebe, Rebecca Njau, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, David Rubadiri, William Block Modisane, Louis Nkosi, Grace Ogot, Frances Ademola, and from the diaspora, Langston Hughes. Even the local music scene was starting to blossom. The most widely listened to genre of music in Uganda at independence was Kadongo Kamu. The late Christopher Sebaduka is considered the father of Kadongo Kamu. The genre was, however, popularized by Fred Masagazi, Eklas Kawalia, and Eli Wamala in the early to mid-1960s. The state of indigenous cinema in post-independence Uganda was not as promising. The alienation of native Ugandans from the medium is documented in American scholar Jane Banfield's 1964 article for Transition magazine, titled Film in East Africa. In the article, Jane Banfield says, "The Ugandan Film Unit is a department of the Ministry of Information, Broadcasting, and Tourism under the direction of two Europeans who worked for the Crown Film Unit, both on a 2-year contract with UNESCO to train local producers. Sometime this year, the African staff will take over the unit fully and consist of a producer, 2 directors or cameramen, an editor, and a newsreel unit." Elsewhere in the article, she says, "The exhibition of commercial films in commercial cinemas is yet another story. The viewing audience is small in both absolute numbers and in proportion to the population. The East African market cannot demand or expect to receive much time or attention from the major producing companies. Cinema prices are high compared to other forms of entertainment. The audiences are largely Asian, with a small European and small African audience." On attaining independence, it is clear to see that building a cinema culture was never a real government priority. The high production cost of film, the lack of film infrastructure, inexperienced personnel, and the limited financial resource of the new government relegated cinema to the bottom of the barrel of government development activities. The practice was seen as a luxury in a country still struggling to expand the provision of basic needs like healthcare and education to the masses.
The world seems dark, but these darkening scenes
spite of Uganda's relatively peaceful transition into independence, the country was not excluded from the political turmoil that spread over the continent in the early post-colonial period. Prime Minister Milton Obote suspended the constitution in 1966, and the following year he declared Uganda a republic and instated himself as president. Obote was soon overthrown in 1971 by one of his army generals, Idi Amin Dada. He further exacerbated the repressive nature of Uganda's governance with a spate of high-profile and civilian extrajudicial killings during his regime. This ensured that there was no freedom of speech or political discourse in the media and the arts. One example of Amin's government's no-nonsense approach towards the artists of the time is perhaps best exemplified by the murder of popular playwright and actor Byron Kawadwa after showcasing a Luganda language play titled Oluyimba lwa Wankoko, or Song of the Cock, perceived to be a political satire of Amin's Uganda at the Festival of Arts and Culture in Lagos in 1977. Amin had earlier in his regime expelled Uganda's Indian population from the country on the grounds of an economic war. At the time, the Indian community constituted a considerable chunk of Uganda's entrepreneurial class, with some of the early Ugandan cinemas among their business interests. Amin claimed the move was aimed at giving Uganda back to Ugandans. Like many of the other businesses handed out by Amin to his cronies and associates, the cinemas were run into the ground, and the low film audience numbers owing to low incomes and insecurity in the country did not help. Amin was deposed in 1979 with the help of the Tanzanian forces. In the country's first election held in 1980, Milton Obote won a second term in power, but the results of the election were rejected by his opponents. This sent Uganda into a 5-year protracted civil war in which almost all economic activity and development came to a halt. The Ugandan Bush War ended in 1986 when Yoweri Museveni came into power with the National Resistance Army, now operating as a state party called the National Resistance Movement. The suppression of free speech and thought of civilians led to a number of members of the young nation's intellectual class fleeing the country, with many of them never returning. A key example of this is the heralded author Okot Pibitek, whose epic poem Song of Lawino is arguably Uganda's greatest literary export. A conscientious objector to the state of governance in Uganda, Okot Pibitek fled the country into neighboring Kenya in 1969. He returned shortly before his death in 1982. Okot Pibitek symbolizes the devastating effect of the artistic and creative brain drain in these very tumultuous years of Uganda's history. Key to this transition were a group of innovative employees of Uganda Television, Mike Makamazibu, George Sengendo, and Faustin Misamvu. The trio directed and produced early recorded theatre shows on the UTV soundstage in the late 80s. They went on to direct the majority of the early episodes of the groundbreaking show, That's Life Mwatu. The show, produced by the legendary theatre group The Ebonies, in conjunction with VCL Studios, was a hit. It became iconic in the country for its humorous and at times salacious dissection of Ugandan family life and contemporary culture. Faustin Misamvu directed It's Not Easy and also co-directed Adopted Twins alongside Zimbabwean director John Riba. With theatre re-establishing itself as a dominant form of performance art in the early Museveni years, practitioners who largely operated in the countryside were able to establish themselves and create vibrant followings of their own. Most prominent amongst them would be Winko Wakaritundu. Based in Western Uganda with the Chinimba drum actors, he was able to popularize local entertainment by recording and proliferating plays shot on location with members of his theatre group. One of the more memorable recurring characters he played in his productions was the character of Rutamirika, who became a household name for his comedic antics. Although there was an increase in the inflow of Hollywood and Chinese cinema through VHS and later DVD in the country between the 90s and early 2000s, there was an increasing demand for local content. This led to the rapid expansion of Uganda's media space, with local TV stations like the now defunct Twava Broadcasting Services or WBS, causing a wave of contemporary visual media to permeate the fabric of Ugandan society. Ugandan musicians were quick to adapt to the expansion of the local radio and television scene to their advantage, with music videos quickly being integrated into the local music production and marketing model. Clearcut and Juliana's All I Wanna Know, shot by paparazzi, is still considered a groundbreaking work of Ugandan pop culture. This group of videographers consisted of names like Twist Kanyike, Mustaq Abdallah, and Donald Mugisha, also known as Dedak. Music producer Steve Jean is also cited as highly influential in the modernizing of Uganda's show business scene. By the early 2000s, filmmaking was starting to get democratized due to access to much cheaper and user-friendly production technology. There was also a desire to offset the cultural imperialism of Hollywood, which dominated the urban cinemas and local bibandas. One of the leading proponents of the local digital feature-length filmmaking scene in the early 2000s was Haj Ashraf Semogeri. He wrote, directed, and produced Feeling Struggle in 2005 under his Pearl Africa production company.
I joined the filmmaking in 2000, around there, 2000, and becoming as an independent filmmaker, it was 2005. But those who were making films, they were either commissioned or making it for adverts and promoting some issue like cotton growing in Uganda or coffee growing in Uganda. And in the early 2000s, Nigerian films came here. That is 2003 there. Or 5 there, we started watching this one, Suicide Mission, Omusajja Agwana Muchupa. There is a book from Nigeria called Lion and the Jewel, written by Wole Soyinka. Came here in 1972 and has been on the Ugandan syllabus for long. But from 1972 to date, if you count the people who have read that book, they are not even 100,000. And those who have read it, they read it because it was on syllabus. But when you come to that film which came here, 2005, Suicide Mission, by now, over 10 million have watched that. I also got excited. I had my son here, rest in peace, he died, but he could go to school and come back here to watch those films. They are so interesting because they are almost showing our life, the way they eat, the building of the houses. They are similar to ours. So people started, I also got interested that, now, let me try and do the thing. So 2005, around August, I got a camcorder. I bought it from Katwe there. Someone had bought this who bring all the equipment. I saw it. I went with my boy here. It was called the Chimera. They sold it to me. It was around 600,000. And told him, let us start. I had that story, Feeling a Struggle. We coded it. I showed it, and I received the full houses, full as it was done, the making. The story was strong.
It tells the story of a girl kidnapped from her parents as an infant for a ritual sacrifice in modern-day Uganda. The girl, whose life is spared, grows up to be an influential attorney after being raised by a barren couple. She is soon discovered by her biological parents, sending the life of everyone involved into a spiral. It also featured household names of the time like Princess Sheila Vanunji and Patrick Omujuka as leads to add to its commercial appeal.
All of a sudden, someone from London was watching it, told me that, let's take it to the London people. He bought even the ticket for me. I took it to London. In fact, I did not distribute it here myself. At first, I used to go around with my DVD here. Even when I'm going to Mbale, I took it to Mbale, Masaka, Jinja, Yiganga, that goes my DVD. And I got money. Then when I went to London, a white man called Stephen Geoffrey with the urban films. The last group in London, they called them urban films. But the Ugandans, they bought it. Moreover, at 8,000 pounds, 18 million. By then, the pound was at 3,000. I got excited. So I said, Niwamanya, now I'm going to get money. That's how I started retreating, withdrawing from theater to start the screen. Yeah.
He followed his debut feature with Murder in the City in 2006, a drama that follows the murky events surrounding the murder of a prominent businesswoman by her spouse. It is widely believed to be an adaptation of the real-life murder of Robin Achiyinji by her husband, the now-deceased Dr. Aggrey Chiyinji. His third film, Mukajanga, The Passion of the Uganda Matters, was released in 2009. In this film, Haji Semogere makes the creative leap to a historical epic in his retelling of the execution of the Uganda Matters, a group of 45 Christian and Muslim converts sentenced to death by Kabaka Mwanga II of Buganda. This is his most widely seen film in the country, and on that basis, perhaps his most successful. Other key names in the early years of China Uganda are Cindy Magara, Donald Mugisha, and Matthew Bishanga, also known as Matt Bish. Cindy Magara was the first woman to direct a film in Uganda, which she did as a student at Makerere University. Her film, Fate, which premiered in 2006, tells the story of Kate, a successful corporate executive who succumbs to pressure from her family to get married. Her profession and family life is thrown a curveball when she realizes she is infected with HIV when her husband's dark past comes to light. Donald Mugisha, who started out as a music video editor, released his first film titled Divisions in 2007. The film starred popular musician Robert Kyagulanyi Ssentamu, more famously known as Bobi Wine, alongside 3 other characters who come from 4 different parts of the country and end up in the grimy slums of Kampala. They come to terms with the harsh reality of city life and the disparity between the social classes. Matthew Bishanga, also known as Matt Bish, following his film studies in Amsterdam, returned to the country in 2005. He set up a production company primarily working on music videos before writing and directing his 2007 feature, Battle of the Souls. The film is based on the dramatic spiritual redemption of his real-life brother, Roger Mugisha, who was a popular radio personality at the time. The film that starred Joel Atiku Prince and Matthew Nawiso received 10 nominations at the 5th African Movie Academy Awards. The film was let down on home soil by limited promotion and distribution. Other prominent titles from this earlier period of Ugandan cinema include Mariam Ndagire's 2007 film Down This Road I Walk and Henry Sally's 2008 film Chiwani, which spawned a popular Ugandan single of the same name performed by Bobi Wine.
We have a problem. The problem I told you earlier that Ugandans are not trained. Most of them have learned it on job. In fact, the first trained person we had here was Matt Biff. Matt Biff from Canada. Then there's another one I got, what's called Max Cheyune. He also trained from Canada. He went as a journalist. Then he came back and also started. I worked with him on one project. It was Murder in the City. Yeah. So it started that. But the rest were any professional. And many of them jumped on the wagon of making the film. So the problem we got, most of them were not writers of good stories. So we had many stories. The first one may be good, but the second one may not be interesting. So things deteriorated a bit. And this makeshift Vibanda be a failure. Our Vibanda, people were not coming. At first, for me, they watched it. Feeling struggle, they watched it. But the Uganda people also we did not cooperate so well. Others started pirating, and the makers became angry. And started arresting the pirates. That was a mistake. Because they started arresting pirates before we had created the stars. The Ugandan film industry doesn't have stars. Like the Nigerian, you talk of Genevieve, you take of the Noah, Ramsey, those people. Here we don't have them. Here we don't have stars. And the mere fact that we don't have stars, nobody can go to the library and ask for that. I want Farouk. The stars may I see on the stage because they were not yet developed into great stars for the film industry in Uganda. These people, the pirates, were helping us to take the videos around. Yeah, but most actors, they are known film stars. They are known in Kampala, other than Masaka, Mbale. They are known there.
The most prominent downtown filmmaker is Isaac Nabwana and his Wakaliwood outfit, who are without a doubt Uganda's biggest film export in recent years. Nabwana's 2010 film Who Killed Captain Alex is an action film narrated by a Ugandan video jockey who is part and parcel of the local film viewing culture. This film catapulted him into international fame with its unintentional humor, gratuitous use of violence, and overly ambitious use of green screen visual effects. The film's trailer went viral on YouTube and brought the attention of the world to Ugandan cinema like no film had done before, although local opinions remain divided on the quality of the film. His films are heavily influenced by martial arts and Hollywood action films. Some of the commendable films during this decade include Caroline Kamia's triptych of narratives, Imani, Matt Bish's State Research Bureau, Dil Mandila's The Felicitas Fable, Donald Mugisha's sophomore film Boda Boda Thieves, Bala Bala Sese written by Osama Mukwaya and directed by Luchamuzi Bashir, House Arrest by Joseph Ken Sebagala, Devil's Chest by Hassan Mageye, Veronica's Wish by Nisha Kalema and Rhea Manamfuka, and Tembele by Maurice Mugisha. Luke Manali's action thriller film The Girl in the Yellow Jumper became the first Ugandan film to be distributed internationally by entertainment giant Netflix. This was a watershed moment for Ugandan cinema. It showed that a film made locally could attain a wide international audience with comparatively less marketing costs to those of much larger Hollywood productions. Cinematic storytelling through the medium of animation has also given creatives another avenue for creative expression. Most prominent in this new crop of digital storytellers is Raymond Malinga and his Creatures Animation Group. The animation studio's debut 3D short animated film, Akalabanda Ate My Homework, garnered positive reviews and audience reaction on its release online in 2017. Raymond has since gone on to collaborate with Disney on the Afrofuturist animated anthology Kizazi Moto in 2023, with his short Hada Boy serving as the series' pilot episode. A landmark moment came in 2024, with Ugandan filmmaker Moses Bwayo being nominated for a Best Documentary Feature Film Oscar at the 96th Academy Awards. The nominated film by Bwayo was titled Bobi Wine, the People's President, and documents the rise of popular Ugandan musician Robert Kyagulanyi Ssentamu to the position of Uganda's central opposition political figure. It was distributed by National Geographic. The desire of the current crop of Ugandan filmmakers to tell a plethora of stories borrowing from Uganda's rich cultural heritage, socio-political history, and contemporary pop culture far exceeds the economic and cultural limitations they face. Uganda's film industry is unlike the film industries in Nigeria, Ghana, and a number of francophone countries in West Africa, whose governments on attaining independence took a special interest in fostering a film culture. This was mainly because their leaders had an appreciation for the potential cultural and social impact of a decolonized indigenous cinema that gave a positive representation of their people and their values, history, and aspirations.
Now, people only think about festivals. Yeah, that's why we have so many short films that feature 1 hour or 2 hours. Film. We have short films. People are making films for the festivals. Now, the good thing, even this DSTV has come. But it's not for the mass. Yeah? It is us, the makers, who watch the film. Very few people watch Ugandan films. So I'm also still thinking about what should we do to make Ugandan film popular.
The Ugandan film industry has attracted a lot more support from the Ugandan government, local and international organizations, and private investors. However, the consumption of local film productions is still largely dwarfed by Western media.
Filmmaking in Uganda, that industry is still virgin. There are so many stories. And now, people, though they trained themselves, most of them trained on the job, but they mind the content, quality so much. They mind the quality. And you hear them when you're talking to them, they will tell you, they will criticize. Yeah? The pictures, some of them even criticize the story. But for me, even if your quality is bad, please, the story must be good because you have so many. We have 49, the population is 49, 9 million. We have 49 million stories. If you add those of those people who died, there are many and very good ones. So the future for me will depend on technology. If we harness the technology well, the future for filmmaking in Uganda is very bright because you have now good filmmakers. But now, how do we use the social media and the technology to earn money? That's very important. I can't tell you now, I can't tell you that we are going to do this because always, every day, things are changing. I told you, I bought a PD 190 in 2005. I came here, but by 2006, HD had come in. You could not use that one. So every month, things are changing. But how we use technology, how we use the media, social media, to sell our content is now the most important. And from what I see, it's also coming.
Filmmakers in the country remain optimistic about the prospects of the film industry and continue to build a number of professional networks in and outside the country. The indie nature of Ugandan cinema offers complete freedom of creative expression. It presents brave and innovative filmmakers with a chance to actively explore their history and culture. It also allows the world at large to be exposed to the richness of narratives from a reservoir of stories kept secret by decades of social and artistic repression in what many call the Pearl of Africa.